So it's happened. Cyberpunk 2077 has been delayed again. I'm pretty sure many of you have seen the tweet that they released. I'm not going to read out the entire thing to you word for word and blow out the video, but it has been delayed by 21 days and the new release date is December 10th. And their main reason for it is because they need more time for the current gen versions of the game, as obviously it has not reached their expectations. They do address that the game has gone gold and has already been burnt on discs and that there will be a day one patch. So the response to this has been pretty divided. People are upset that it's been delayed again after being told it wasn't going to be. Others understand that game development is a really rocky road and then are willing to wait a little bit more as long as the game is absolutely perfect on release. But to me, for somebody that has worked in game development before, I have a lot of thoughts and opinions on this. And it goes further beyond than they just need more time to work on the game. The release of Cyberpunk 2077 is a lot more important than you may think. Not only will this likely be the most expensive AAA game to ever release, the success of this game will be a statement to all gamers of where we'll be heading in the future of gaming. And with this delay, there must mean that there was a reality where this game could have failed if it was released on November. And we're going to cover that and my opinions on why this game must succeed. Not because it's a game made by CD Projekt Red, but for gaming as a whole, at least in a traditional standpoint. So in today's video, I'm going to be covering all the reasons to the delay, more than you actually might think, why the game's budget has become so large, why there was tons of advertisements for the November release only then for it to be delayed again, my experiences with the industry and my thoughts on top of why this has happened. This video definitely required a lot of article reading, and I'll post all my readings and research in the description down below. So if you really fancy taking a deeper dive, that'll be there for you. And before we really get into it, my question of the day will be, does this delay to Cyberpunk 2077 affect you buying the game? For me, I'll answer that further into the video, but I'm very interested in your thoughts and opinions on that one. And just one quick final thing, our Patreon is literally wrapping up in like 1 or 2 days now. So if you want perks like newsletters and exclusive EcksToo videos that will never go to the public, or even get your very own EcksToo avatar designed by a professional artist, definitely check it out in the top right corner in the info card or in the pinned comment down in the comment section. But with that all said and done, let's do a real deep dive into why Cyberpunk 2077 is going to be delayed again, and why AAA games in general do get delayed. Alright, so let's get into it. Whilst game companies have used more traditional advertising mediums more so now than they did in the last 10 years, it is relatively uncommon to find physical advertising for a game. Say it be on a massive LED screen in a popular city, or in a TV commercial during breaks on a show. I think it's very safe to say that Cyberpunk 2077 is a massive exception. This is more of an opinion than fact, but I would absolutely say that Cyberpunk 2077 probably has the biggest advertising budget of any game so far. So believe me that they have placed a lot of money in physical and digital advertising for the November 19th release date. It really hurts them more than it actually hurts us. But the follow-up question is, why are they willing to lose out on hundreds of thousands of dollars on advertising for mere 21 more days of development? Not only that, it saves them 21 days of production costs and salaries. Well, according to Sportskeeda, G-Affinity Esports, and Tweaktown, Witcher 3 had roughly $85 million in total development costs, with an additional $25 million in advertising and indirect expenses. Cyberpunk 2077, on the other hand, has roughly had, on an estimate, $121 million in development. Now, I would say this development cost has probably covered over a full decade. Witcher 2 was released on 17th of May 2011, and my rough estimates is that it did probably start some form of development after Witcher 2, alongside the development of Witcher 3. Witcher 3 did come out on 18th of May 2015, 4 years after Witcher 2, but Cyberpunk 2077 was actually first mentioned by CD Projekt Red on the May 31st, 2012, in a summer conference.
So you probably saw this guy a little bit earlier. Since yesterday, I was floating around the net. We have a second team, and I'm talking about it for the first time today. And the second team is based on Witcher veterans. And they're working on a new AAA RPG. I suppose you would like to find out about what RPG it is. I would like to draw you a vision. Imagine a rich and futuristic world with ultra-modern technology.
And not only that, in a separate interview, they did state that Mike and CD Projekt Red grossly underestimated the sheer magnitude of the project, and their personnel grew from 200 to nearly 500 just for Cyberpunk 2077 alone. However, how many years of this is pre-production, we don't know. But all of this information comes to one point, which is if this game is not perfect on release and has bad press relating to its first few weeks of launch, then honestly, this game could potentially see them in a dire financial situation. We don't have the full scope of CD Projekt Red's corporate reports, meaning we don't know where the majority of this budget is coming from, whether it be through investors or through the company itself, and the fact that the game is being developed and published by CD Projekt. As of recording, CD Projekt had a market capitalization of about $8.13 billion. So whilst 121 million does seem like a drop in the bucket, it's still a significant amount of money. And the success of this game will likely change how games will be developed in future. Games budgets year by year have been increasing exponentially. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, which was released in 2009, only cost $50 million to develop, and the marketing costs were 4 times that at $200 million, totaling the game's cost at $250 million. Grand Theft Auto 5, which came out in 2013, had $130 million in development, and they were record highs of 1,000 people working on that game. Now, bearing in mind, all of these costs also include post-launch. Much like how Grand Theft Auto had a lot of content updates like Grand Theft Auto Online. Cyberpunk 2077 hasn't even come out yet, and it's already 9th on the most expensive video games to develop. And the $121 million is an old estimate. We don't actually know the true value of how much this game has cost, and we don't even know the marketing cost yet. So definitely expect Cyberpunk 2077 to be more expensive than Grand Theft Auto 5 and even Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. So to relay again, this is why it's really important that Cyberpunk 2077 needs all the time it can have to actually have the perfect launch. To have a game fail at launch due to unseen bugs, servers going down, games having real big issues on current gen systems, it will fundamentally change how much money publishers are willing to put into a game. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, that's fine. It doesn't need even more money. Unfortunately, that is not true. Game developer salaries are going up each year due to inflation, and with the new generation of game consoles and Nvidia graphics cards, we're looking at games being able to run at 4K and even in some cases 8K. And the bigger the textures, the more processing power and the more time it takes to develop those textures. Artists are not going to magically upscale what they've already developed and it's just going to look amazing. And with all these increased textures and graphics and shaders means more bytes. Games become larger, SSDs become larger, and the cost per byte has plateaued since 2010, meaning that games are just going to get even more expensive on the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, meaning a much larger risk to AAA game developers. So if there was a reality where Cyberpunk 2077 could have failed on the November 19th release date, that could impact a lot of games that are currently being worked on for the PS5 and Xbox Series X. And yes, while games have become more expensive over the years, you got to remember players are getting an absolute deal via price per megabyte, with players paying roughly about $10 per megabyte in 2000, with them paying no more than 15 cents now in 2015. And whilst data points post that have been a bit inconclusive, we could look at games going down as low as 5 cents per MB, meaning there is far less financial risk on us, but exponentially so for developers and publishers. I hope all this information I'm throwing at you kind of gives you a bigger idea of why Cyberpunk 2077 got delayed. It's so much more than those extra 21 days. And yes, obviously that price per MB is decreasing a lot thanks to free-to-play games. But I think this is a big trend that we're going down in the future of gaming. Where is that point where more games on average are coming out free than paid? Cyberpunk 2077 follows that traditional media of you paying for a full game, and it may be a day where that strategy is just not viable for developers and publishers. We are eventually going to hit a ceiling on how much cash a developer or publisher can put into a game. But who knows, maybe I'm looking into it a little bit too much. Maybe the game is already pretty much near on perfect and they just needed 21 more days to just focus on current gen versions actually working properly on PS4 and Xbox X. But there is no denying that Cyberpunk 2077 will have a big say of where games will go in the future. Another situation to touch on is the new graphics cards from Nvidia and even from AMD. The RTX 3080 is having such a drought in supply that some users aren't even going to get their cards up until maybe 2021. And Cyberpunk 2077 is a next-gen game, meaning it'll have a big advantage of being on the 3080 cards. So, if the game came out on November 19th, not many people would be able to play Cyberpunk 2077 on its full capabilities. And with the RTX 3070 coming out on the day of this recording, I think it's safe to say they're going to be completely out of stock on that in literally minutes. So it begs the question, does this delay allow more players to actually play Cyberpunk 2077 how it was supposed to be played, as a next-gen game? And if you think you console players are safe, I've got bad news for you too. All versions of the PS5, all versions of the Xbox Series X and S are all out of stock. And as of this recording, there has been reports that PlayStation 5 pre-order cancellations are starting to make the rounds, meaning that people that wanted to get Cyberpunk 2077 for the next-gen console are out of luck too. It's almost as if this game is a staple of what next-generation games will be. And unfortunately, not many people are going to be able to have that experience if it was released on November 19th. You're probably wondering, why is there so many shortages now when there wasn't really an issue beforehand? And the fact of the matter is just simply Corona. The coronavirus has had a massive impact on game development and on manufacturing. And I honestly do not say that lightly. I don't really want to get into the full details of this for a video on Cyberpunk 2077, but Linus Tech Tips actually did an amazing video covering all of this and how it impacted manufacturing, and why we're probably still seeing it today at the end of this year. I'll link his video in the pinned comments down below and in the top right corner. There is another aspect to the delay of Cyberpunk 2077, and it actually makes quite a lot of sense. The amount of games that are launching in November in anticipation for Christmas. I'm not going to cover every single game that is released in November, but here's just a little handful to prove a point. Watch Dogs Legion, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Dirt 5, Destiny 2 Beyond Light, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, all big AAA games and DLCs that are going to be launching that month. Whilst I'm pretty sure this isn't the main focus for the delay, it is a little bit of a bonus to CD Projekt. The reason for so many games at this time of the month is obviously, as I mentioned before, Christmas. And a lot of game publishers like to get their game out in November. That gives them ample time for parents to buy that game for their kid for Christmas. December 10th is a little bit close to call for a Christmas release, giving only parents and people 15 days to get the game before Christmas. But many people will probably be still holding on to their pre-orders. Not only that, it does give the company a lot more time to get supplies ready for its launch date. So providing that CD Projekt has this all sorted, you won't see any supply issues when the game launches in December 10th. What will be interesting is if there's going to be any game bundles with the PS5 or Xbox Series, because it definitely looks like the advantage that Cyberpunk 2077 has is that it's definitely going to be supported by PS5 and Xbox Series. So whether or not there's going to be a game bundle upcoming to December 10th alongside the game's launch, we'll have to wait and see. But with all those possible reasons, let's address the elephant in the room, the backlash. Now, I don't necessarily mean the game in general, but I'm talking about the game developers and the social media managers that have been getting all the abuse. Now, there are a few tweets circling around the internet right now where the game's Twitter account did confirm that there won't be any delays and it was definitely going to be coming out on the 19th of November. But I really have to stress, and you've probably seen this from many other YouTubers that are talking about it already, this is not their decision. Since CD Projekt is making the game and publishing it itself, the decisions are coming from management. But that's very easy to wrap your head around. At the end of the day, it's just gamers trying to vent their anger at anybody or anyone that is related to the game. I think deep down inside, a lot of people know it's not the game developers that are causing the delay. And it doesn't help that there's so many positions in game development that people just assume, oh, it's a game dev position. Whilst yes, you do have your general positions in game development, like artists and animators, game designers, level designers, engine and physics engineers, you do also have a lot of positions where they don't have a hand in how the game is developed. And that still ends up falling into the term game dev. Those be audio professionals, branding, national and international marketing teams, social media managers, and more. So when a social media manager says, yes, there is no more delays, they've heard that from the higher ups. That's all they know. So when there is a delay, they're likely not to know until it's actually been told to them in advance. and they post it with a note from the management in like literally hours after being told. If you don't believe me, Game Informer just released an article saying that the Cyberpunk 2077 developers didn't know there was a delay until the day of. They likely received the same internal email the social media manager got, and it's not like the marketing team just happily organised buses around London to advertise the game with the old November release, with knowledge it was going to be delayed. This came from the higher-ups who made the executive decision last minute and told everyone it was going to be pushed to December. This issue didn't come from the bottom up, it came from the top down. And according to this article at Game Informer, it does look like it's true. According to 3 developers, the decision to delay was a swift one, after looking at the quality differences between the current gen and the next gen versions. And as I theorized before, CD Projekt Red has said that it wants the launch of the Cyberpunk 2077 game to be perfect, so any perceived flaws are addressed quickly. According to the team, the decision to delay was not even discussed until Monday, October 26th, with the decision being reached on Tuesday the next day. So there was about 24 or so hours until the announcement actually reached to us. The article does also go into depths of why the developers weren't told until the last minute. And that comes down to Polish labour laws, where leadership was not legally allowed to tell the whole team due to its size of over 1,000 employees, without each individual signing a non-disclosure agreement. And getting 1,000 people to sign an NDA agreement is definitely going to take way more than 24 hours. So it makes sense that they heard about this delay as it came out. That's not on CD Projekt Red, by the way, guys. That is actually just abiding by the law. Most European laws do have this as well, but the US is obviously an exception where employees can get told this ahead of time. But the game is not being developed in the US, it's being developed in Poland. Now, I'm not going to use this time to badger on about my experience in game development. I mentioned on this channel where I worked before and my experiences with those companies. And I'm going to be honest, this is really not common. And especially on a game this large, I'm actually surprised they managed to keep it reined in to only 21 days. All of the games that I've worked on have had delays and have never reached their first deadline goal. Before I worked for studios, I always attributed it to poor management, but when I was in the trenches and really in the thick of it, it couldn't be more further from the truth. A funny little piece of advice that I learned when working in these environments is that any time somebody asks you for a deadline on what you're working on, you take that original deadline that you think is going to be finished by and then double it. I always worried about using this piece of advice because I always thought it made me look lazy. Like, oh, adding this little bit to this engine that I was working on is going to take me 4 weeks when I thought it could take me 2. I always feared that by giving that answer, the person that asked me for the deadline is probably in the back of his head thinking, wow, this guy's really slow or just straight up lazy. Or even worse, thinking that I wasn't actually good for the job. For me, that was my issue when it came to working for management. And I was in a brief period of time outside of game development in management. And I always tried to keep that fear with me when I asked for deadlines to people below me. But even after all those years of working in game and web development, I never successfully got over that issue. In fact, I still have the issue when it comes to deadlines of getting videos done for the channel. It's such a soft core skill that is insanely hard to learn, at least for me anyway, and even after all these years, I don't know if I'll ever get over it. But I'm just talking from one man. This is a company that is about 500 to 600 people strong working on this game. So whilst 21 days does seem like quite a lot for game developers, especially if they're crunching 6-day weeks, I'm going to be straight, I will be surprised if they do reach the 10th of December deadline. And I mean this at no fault to the Cyberpunk 2077 development team whatsoever, but a decision with this much weight and this much money behind the release date in November, 21 days maybe doesn't seem enough to me. I'm not going to give you conspiracy theories that the game will be delayed again, but I'm just going to be straight up and say that I'm actually surprised that they were able to rein it in within 2020. I don't just say this out of just thin air. There was a Q&A with Vice President of Business Development Michael Nowalski stating that there wasn't any problem with current gen consoles running the game, it's just optimization that needed to be handled. And following up with December 10th being a firm, if not quite rock hard date. But also finishing it off with, we feel maybe not comfortable but confident, and did come across as a little bit shaky on the December 10th release date, with another alleged CD Projekt Red dev stating that the day one patch is likely going to be quite massive, and that even the gold status came at quite of a surprise to the team. Now, gold status coming at a surprise to the team is a little bit alarming, but a lot of people who have found the statement is taking it out of context. stating that the game needed 4 or 5 more months of work is not really true. We're talking post-launch development, which still is included after the game's launch, at least in budget terms anyway. And the reason I say that is that you can Q&A this game as long as you like, but it'll never be as good as 1 million people purchasing the game and playing it for the first time. Open expansive games like this are hellish to Q&A. And as games get bigger and more complex by the year, QAing them gets tougher and tougher and tougher. That is why you do see a lot of day one patches for game releases, compared to the good old days of SNES or N64 or PS1, where you just launched the game and it was done. But people love to forget there is so many changes when it goes to US and then Europe. For example, Super Mario 64 had a lot of bug fixes during the US launch, and then even more vital ones when it came to Europe. But nobody really wants to discuss about that because, oh, games were perfect back then. And that's not just stating that Super Mario 64 is objectively easier to Q&A than Cyberpunk 2077. A lot of other people also complained about the fact that the game had gone gold and then it got delayed again. I think a lot of gamers are just starting to get the understanding of what going gold actually means, but don't actually fully understand the whole term itself. Going gold is a term many equate with the game being finished, and that's true with some small details usually missed. Going gold is less for gamers and more for investors so that they know their investment is ready to ship. So between the days between going gold and launch day, there is still development processes to follow. Game developers don't just wrap up and then go home and then never go back to work again. These include further quality and assurance tests, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's gone gold for all platforms. And yes, whilst it was a bit of a generalized statement of the game going gold, it definitely looked like it wasn't the case for current gen versions of the game. And I don't really like going back to talking about myself and my experiences, but when I was working on one game project, optimization was probably the most miserable experience I had in game development. I'm not very experienced, so I was always at the mercy of the compiler, but getting the game to run on multiple consoles or multiple infrastructures forced me to be a better programmer. It's why when I finally got that feature in the game working, it meant that I got it working on the worst way possible, and that there is 100 ways to code it better and more efficiently. So taking a game of this scope and working it on current gen hardware must be just hell for the developers. And I really feel for the guys that are crunching on this. It must be just the worst thing in the world, unless they love their job. And I did love my job, but you know, at the same time, I didn't love my job a little bit. So I'm going to wrap it up like this. To the players out there, I know this news is not something you really want to hear. Trust me, it's certainly something I don't want to hear either. But Cyberpunk 2077 still follows that traditional way of making games, where you're making a product and then you're selling it. But this traditional approach to the market is changing, and it's becoming a lot more harder to justify old means of selling a game. We're running out of platform shifts that reset those costs. Whether it be developing for higher resolutions or more advanced hardware, games becoming bigger, and SSD prices not dropping in price at the same rate, there is too much take and not enough give in the industry. Cyberpunk 2077 could be one of the final big staple games that rely on sale figures, whilst more games move into selling a service rather than a product. In a world where retention becomes more and more important, Cyberpunk 2077 must make sure that this release is absolutely perfect. As for right now, it's far too big to fall. So do us all a favour, don't harass the devs. There are plenty of reasons to this delay and why we have to wait until December. Plus, all this hate just makes a really negative cycle that pits developers against publishers, publishers against players. So when we see articles about consumers harassing game developers, it really starts to make me think that consumers are starting to get a little bit too entitled and taking things way too seriously, when in reality this should be the sustainability of a hobby we all love that pays bills, keep us sane, and then sometimes drives us a little crazy. But not to the point where you're harassing and sending death threats to game developers. I mean, come on, man. But that does lead me to the end of the video. I get this was a long one, and it's definitely a departure from what we usually do in EcksToo. We have been covering Squadrons a lot recently, and just loads of Star Wars in general. So it was really interesting to make a video about a sci-fi game that isn't Star Wars. So to all the EcksToo fans that are still watching, what are your thoughts on this? Would you like us to do more videos like these? Would you perhaps enjoy our thoughts and opinions when we play these games? Or do you prefer it in these more informative, straight to the point videos? Really interested in your thoughts and opinions on this one. So definitely let me know all of that in the comments down below, along with our question of the day. And of course, I can't leave without saying thank you so much to our patrons who make these videos possible. You guys absolutely rock. We couldn't do this without you. So if you definitely want to be a part of that and get things like newsletters, bonuses, extra EcksToo videos that'll never go live to the public, get to play Star Wars Squadrons with us, or got your very own EcksToo avatar designed by professional artists and exclusive merch, definitely sign up today. It really goes so far, more than you know, for the channel. So of course, if you're interested, it's in the top right corner or in the pinned comment below. But with that all said and done, I've been Charlie, you've been watching EcksToo, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, guys.